These days, an island getaway is about the most desirable trip you can take. But not all islands are created equal. Most of us want a bit of heat, a beach or two, which is why nobody thinks of Europe as an island paradise. And yet, ironically, tens of millions of years ago, that's exactly what it was. During the Cretaceous, Europe was far warmer than it is now, and much of it was drowned beneath a shallow tropical sea, a sprawling archipelago of islands large and small. Most of them were pleasant, unassuming, uninhabited, lovely spots for a holiday. But a few of them had residents that would make any visit deeply, deeply questionable. And of all the islands you could have washed up on in this vanished world, the most unhinged by a wide margin was one place in particular. A place where, and this is the twist that makes it so strange, the dinosaurs were not the rulers. On this island, the dinosaurs were the prey. Welcome to Hatzeg Island, the single worst island getaway imaginable. You won't find it on any map today. Its only trace is a scatter of rock formations around the town of Hatzeg in Romania. But between roughly 90 and 66 million years ago, it was a freestanding island of around 80,000 square kilometers, about the size of Hispaniola, the island that holds Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So a respectable chunk of land. It sat near the equator, ringed on every side by at least 200 kilometers of open water, the Tethys Sea. Total isolation. And that isolation is the key to everything that follows. Because for a long time, Hatzeg would have been genuinely peaceful. Very few animals could reach it, and fewer still could establish a lasting population. If you'd been marooned there in the early days, your biggest worry would have been small lizards and sea turtles. But toward the end of the Cretaceous, things changed. Dinosaurs, pterosaurs and other creatures found their way across, settled in, and turned Hatzeg into what looked, on paper, like just another dinosaur-ruled land. Except it wasn't. Because on Hatzeg, size worked backwards. Anyone stumbling onto this island would have known within minutes that something was deeply wrong, because the dinosaurs came in miniature. And the largest, deadliest predators weren't theropods at all. They were giant, carnivorous, ground-stalking pterosaurs that had ballooned into apex predators. Why? The answer is one of the most famous concepts in island biology, the island rule. Insular dwarfism and gigantism. On isolated islands with limited resources, big animals tend to shrink. So the dinosaurs got small. And smaller animals, freed from competition and from the usual dinosaur predators, tend to grow. So the pterosaurs, no longer held in check, exploded in size, producing the largest flying animals that have ever existed. Hatzeg is one of the best real-world examples of this rule we've ever found. Let me introduce the rulers. 3 giant pterosaur genera are known from the island, all from the Azhdarchid family. The smallest, Urojdarko, was still monstrous by everyday standards, a 10-foot wingspan matching the largest birds alive today, though it kept to a modest diet of amphibians, small reptiles and mammals. The next, Albadraco, was a serious step up, with a wingspan around 23 feet, larger than any bird that has ever flown. Standing next to you, it would have towered clean over your head. And unlike its smaller cousin, it had a relatively large, sturdy skull, the first hint of a sinister diet, built for a stronger bite that could take prey most pterosaurs wouldn't dream of, namely dinosaurs. But even Albadraco was, frankly, a warm-up act, because the true king of Hatzeg was Hatzegopteryx. If you've seen my video on this animal, you know the story, and if you haven't, here's the short version. Hatzegopteryx is, as of today, the largest animal known to have ever flown. A wingspan of roughly 12 meters, 39 feet, wider than an F-35 fighter jet. Only Quetzalcoatlus over in North America comes close, and even it couldn't match Hatzegopteryx for sheer bulk, because this thing was built like a bomber. A thick, reinforced skeleton standing around 5 meters tall on the ground, the height of a giraffe, and weighing, some think, as much as a grizzly bear. And how does something that size get airborne? The same way its relatives did, vaulting off the ground on those powerful limbs, launching itself upward before the enormous wings take over. Studies suggest a vertical leap of around 8 feet, then flight. Though it didn't fly far, mostly short hops to scout for prey, because Hatzegopteryx, like Alba Draco, was primarily a ground predator. And apparently a disturbingly good runner, with excellent vision and the height to see clean over the island's vegetation. But it wasn't the body that made it terrifying, it was the head. Hatzegopteryx's skull was around 2.5 meters long, roughly the length of an entire horse, and grotesquely robust, sturdy and compact, anchored to a short neck roped in muscle. This was a skull built to deliver and absorb enormous force, which tells us exactly what it did. Hatzegopteryx was a dinosaur-slayer, driving that massive beak down like a spear to stab and bludgeon prey to death, prey too large to swallow whole. Though its gape was wide enough to swallow something the size of a person outright. Its neck and beak could withstand forces 10 times its own body weight, and specimens show heavy scarring at the back of the skull, the mark of an animal that regularly slammed into struggling prey at high speed. This was, without question, the king of the island. But the pterosaurs weren't your only problem. Hatzeg had crocodile relatives too, who, just like the pterosaurs, cashed in on a world full of dwarf dinosaurs to climb higher up the food chain than they ever could elsewhere. Most were tiny, some smaller than a house cat, but one, Aladaposuchus, got large, around 10 feet and over 220 pounds, heavier than a big jaguar. And it wasn't purely aquatic. Its relatively long limbs suggest it was a capable walker, maybe even a runner. So even away from the water, a big croc was a live threat. There were snakes, though the only one confirmed on Hatzeg was a small, harmless, non-venomous thing about the size of a garter snake. And there were carnivorous dinosaurs, but like everything else, shrunk. One of the more common was Elopteryx, a medium-sized alvarezsaur about 7 feet long, but light as a large beagle, with reduced claws suited to an insect diet of mostly termites. Not scary. Though for a time it was, because it was originally mistaken for a giant owl, a bird 2 meters tall, which would have been the largest owl of all time. Happily for Hatzeg's residents, that turned out to be wrong. Then there's Balaur Bondok, one of the island's genuine mysteries. Famous for having 2 enlarged sickle claws on each foot, it was first described as a strange, stocky raptor, the double-clawed dragon, and everyone assumed it was a killer. But here's the modern twist, and it's a good one. The latest thinking is that Balaur wasn't a predatory raptor at all. It's now most often interpreted as a flightless bird, and those famous double claws were probably used for perching or grasping, not for killing. So the island's scariest-looking little dinosaur may have been a strange, ground-dwelling herbivore. The double-clawed dragon was likely a false alarm. The biggest carnivorous dinosaur on Hatzeg is known only from fragmentary teeth, an indeterminate theropod, misleadingly labelled Megalosaurus hungaricus, probably around 10 feet long, which on any other landmass would be small. Here, it was the largest predatory dinosaur on the island. And that tells you everything. Because the actual giants of Hatzeg, the heaviest animals by weight, were, ironically, the dinosaurs most crushed by dwarfism, the sauropods. Two dwarf titanosaurs lived here, Magyarosaurus and Paludotitan. And Magyarosaurus is one of the most dramatic dwarfs ever found. Its mainland titanosaur relatives, like Hatzegopteryx, reached nearly 70 tons. Magyarosaurus, around 6 meters and under a ton, the size of a horse, not an elephant. One of the smallest sauropods that ever lived. And yet, at that size, it was still the heaviest thing on the island, and a fully grown adult was likely off the menu for any predator, especially since it seems to have carried protective bony armor. Not every dinosaur was so lucky. Telmatosaurus, a dwarf hadrosaur about 16 feet long, had no armor and was likely a staple of Hatzegopteryx's diet. And in a genuinely poignant detail, one Telmatosaurus specimen was found with a benign tumor, an amyloblastoma, growing on its lower jaw, the oldest such tumor ever found in the fossil record. Benign, but it may well have contributed to the animal's death by making eating impossible as it grew. And then, the exception that proves the rule, because not everything on Hatzeg shrank, a lucky few grew. The standout is Gargantuavis, a primitive bird. Now, most Mesozoic birds were crow-sized. Gargantuavis was the size of an ostrich, weighing over 300 pounds, making it the largest bird known from the entire age of dinosaurs. Flightless, heavy-boned, probably foraging for seeds and fruit like a moa. On an island of dwarfs, a giant bird. And if the land wasn't enough, the water finished the job. The shallow seas around Hatzeg held one of the highest diversities of mosasaurs found anywhere on Earth, at least 9 genera, some over 30 feet long. Even the smallest was the size of a large bull shark, and they favoured exactly the warm, shallow water you'd have been swimming in. There were plesiosaurs, and there were sharks, a huge variety, including a Ginsu shark longer than the biggest great white, and Leptostyx, a mackerel shark reaching 27 feet that specifically favoured the shallows near shore. Not, it must be said, good news for vacationers. So there it is, an island where the dinosaurs were shrunk to the size of ponies and preyed upon by ground-stalking pterosaurs the height of giraffes, ringed by a sea full of mosasaurs and giant sharks. And in the end, Mother Nature showed no mercy either. Hatzeg was volcanically active, buried in ash from time to time, and when the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, this isolated island was hit by a tsunami possibly over 30 feet high, followed by fire sweeping through its dry woodland. And so, the most terrifying island that ever existed vanished completely, taking its impossible upside-down little world of giants and dwarfs down with it. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep looking up.